With all that said, let's jump into our sermon for this morning. As you all know, this academic year, we are journeying through the Gospel of Mark, and we're currently working our way through a set of three miracles that Mark recounts as enacted parables, right? So each story is true. All of its details are true. We're not denying the validity of these stories. And each of these stories displays Jesus' real and tangible power over different facets of this creation. However, Mark does want us to read these true stories allegorically. To put it another way, each story is a microcosm, a little world in and of itself. A small singular story, but one that deals with universal themes. A small singular story, but one that can be used as a template to help us understand our lives. A framework through which we can process our experience in this world. If you have a Bible, I encourage you to go ahead and turn to the passage on the screen. It's Mark chapter 5. It's the second half, verses 21 through 43. This is the third and final of these enacted parables. It's the third and final miracle story of this set of three. Mark, and really this story serves as kind of the culmination or the climax of these three stories. Mark has been taking us somewhere the past couple of weeks, and today is really the payoff for all of this journey that we've been going through. So throughout each of these three stories, there's this constant theme. That is the contrast between faith and fear. Okay, so faith and fear. And so far in our journey through these three miracle stories, these enacted parables, fear has really won the day for those who have interacted with Jesus. In the first story, Jesus calms a storm, and the disciples Jesus is on the Sea of Galilee with his disciples in a boat, and the storm comes up, and Jesus silences the storm. Ironically, though, and we're meant to read it ironically, the disciples then end up fearing Jesus more than they ever feared the storm. They were afraid of the storm. They were terrified of Jesus and the unbridled power that he displayed. This is also exactly what we see play out in the second story. So Jesus crosses the sea. He's now in Gentile territory where the people don't know who he is. And he casts out this demon named Legion, and he restores this man who was formerly a demoniac to his right mind. However, the townspeople, instead of celebrating Jesus and worshiping Jesus for doing this wonderful thing, we read that the town feared Jesus. Yet again, they were terrified of his power, and they were more terrified of Jesus than they were ever terrified of the demoniac. The demoniac, they were willing to keep in their town with them. They did shackle him, they did chain him up, they did ostracize him to the tombs, but he could stick around. Jesus, they begged him. They said, leave, get out. We don't want you in our presence. And if you think about this, I talked about this in class, if you think about it, the disciples are still fuzzy about who Jesus really is. The Gentiles in this, it's the Gerasenes in this territory, this Gentile territory, they certainly don't know who Jesus is. And so when they see power greater than their circumstances without the context of understanding Jesus' character, his holiness, his goodness, all they see is his greatness. All they see is his might without his mercy. And it's terrifying. They were terrified of the storm, but if Jesus is more powerful than the storm, shouldn't we be afraid of him? They saw the demoniac, and they were terrified of the demoniac. But if Jesus is more powerful than the demoniac, shouldn't we be more terrified of him? In both of these cases, we see the people interacting with Jesus trade fear of the world for fear of Jesus. But today, in our third and final story, in our third and final miracle story here in this set of three, me and you are going to get to see the other side of the coin. What wonderful things might happen, what beautiful things might happen, what restoration and redemption and reconciliation might happen when instead of fearing Jesus, we put our faith in him. And we put our faith in his unbridled power over this world. So with all that in mind, let's pick up Mark chapter 5, verse 21. When Jesus had again, so he agreed to leave the town, okay? So he's going back over now into Jewish territory, okay? So when Jesus had crossed over by boat on the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. Now, let's pause for a second, because even on the surface, there is dissonance here. This behavior is unbecoming of a man of such prominence. He is a leader in a synagogue, and a leader of the synagogue would not go, which means he was basically voted by his townspeople to help organize the synagogue. This man is well respected. He probably has money. And a man of this level of reputation would not merely would not just go throw himself at the feet of a rabbi. All right? But the dissonance actually runs deeper than that, because here's the deal, right? At this point in Mark, the Pharisees have already begun, in Mark chapter 3, verse 6, they've already begun to plot to kill Jesus. And Jairus, as a synagogue leader, would have been under the sphere of influence of the Pharisees. He, therefore, would have seen Jesus as a heretic, a false prophet, someone who would have caused problems with the Roman government for the Jewish people. Most importantly, or maybe most directly, Jairus would have seen Jesus as a threat to the Jewish faith and his own place in it. And so would all the people that he rubbed shoulders with. That's what makes what happens in verse 22 so surprising. Mark writes, he pleaded with him earnestly. So this man is just begging of Jesus. He's thrown himself at his feet, just begging Jesus. My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she might be healed and she might live. Now, I just want you to imagine you're Jairus for a second. Your daughter falls sick, and quickly you realize this is not just something she's going to get over. And in this day and age, this is something that is going to be a life or death situation. And so you've called for doctors. You've asked your synagogue for prayers for your daughter, and it's all been for naught. None of it has seemed to work. And in your desperation, you remember this man named Jesus. You remember the stories about him. You don't remember the fact that he's very unpopular with your colleagues. You don't remember his popularity with the crowds. The only thing that you care about this man named Jesus is he has this reputation for being able to heal even the most sick of people. And your daughter's on her deathbed, and you don't know what to do about it. And so against your own proclivities, you're not predispositioned to like Jesus, and certainly against social conviction of your colleagues, you seek him out. And you fall at your face before him, and you beg on behalf of your daughter. And I love how Mark's just very direct, almost terse writing here. So Jesus went with him. Right? There's no, if you're Jesus, you know that he's a synagogue leader, and you know that he is influenced by the Pharisees, and so you know that he probably is not predispositioned to like you very much, and you are just, if we're Jesus in this moment, we're gonna probably make this guy at minimum sweat it out, if not full out reject him. Well, why don't you, maybe you even use it as a bartering chip. Hey, if you convince the Pharisees to stop trying to plot to kill me, yeah, I'll go heal your daughter. Or maybe it's like, let me go talk it over with my disciples. We'll think about it, But no, Jesus simply put, Mark said, so Jesus went with them, filled with his unbridled power over this world, ready to use all of it to heal this man's little girl. However, before Jesus can ever get to this little girl, Mark inserts another story right into the middle of this drama. I've talked to you about sandwich texts in the Gospel of Mark, so that's when there's one story and Mark will interject another story into the middle of it and then come back to the original story. So ABA is the pattern there, ABA. So this is now the meat of the Markan sandwich, okay? So we've tasted some bread and we're sinking our teeth into this sandwich, and now we're happening upon the meat of the sandwich. So, Mark inserts another story right into the middle of this drama. Verse 25, a large crowd followed and pressed around Jesus as he's following Jairus to go heal his daughter. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. Mark has just shifted drastic ways. This woman cannot be any more different than Jairus. Jairus was a man of high reputation. This woman, we're going to find out, is the social outcast of all social outcasts in the Jewish world. Right? We're introduced to this sick woman. And obviously, she's bleeding, okay? And that means, she's obviously had this physical toll on her life, right? Each day, this woman, she wakes up and she feels fragile. She feels feeble. She doesn't know. I mean, every morning she wakes up and she doesn't really know if she's going to have the strength, the literal physical strength to take on the day, or if she's just going to waste her day away in the bed. And this very well, in this day and age, this could probably be a fatal ailment for her. However, the turmoil that this bleeding had wreaked havoc, it obviously had wreaked physical havoc on her life, but it was not merely physical pain that this bleeding introduced to her life. Because of her bleeding, this woman would have been considered unclean for temple worship. And so this was not merely a physical reality, this was a spiritual reality as well. In her eyes, in the eyes of her people, she would have been cut off from the very presence of God. This woman was not allowed to come worship the one true living God where he resided in the temple. This also had social implications. So this is not merely physical, this is not merely spiritual. This had major social implications on her life. Part of what it meant to be unclean was that you could make other people unclean. Okay, so think about sickness, right? You don't catch health, you catch sickness. Sickness spreads, health doesn't, right? So this woman, for these 12 years of her bleeding, this woman had been ostracized from her friends, from her family, and her whole people, her whole town. She would have been unable to marry because of this disease. She would have been unable to bear children because of this disease. And in this day and age, there would have been a lot of shame that would have accompanied those two realities. And you'd have to think, if there is this physical toll and this spiritual toll and this social toll on this woman, there would obviously be an emotional toll that this bleeding would have introduced into this woman's life. For 12 years, she had been in pain, she'd been a religious outcast, and she'd be forced into being a hermit against her own will. And so she was desperate. I mean, this woman, you have to think about it, 12 years in, she would literally do anything to become healed. And because of that, we also see that with this ailment came financial ruin for this woman. We read in verse 26, she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors. Doctors in this day and age were much more steeped in superstition than science. And so yes, she would have suffered, that's the right word there, suffered under the hand of many doctors. And the key is this, and had spent all that she had. And yet instead of getting better, she only got worse. So I just want you to put yourself, by the way, I think we get Jairus' name, and we don't get this woman's name. And I think there's imagery even being played out there. This woman has been erased from life, right? Have you ever felt that way? She's lost her identity. She doesn't even have her name anymore, all right? So I want you to put yourself in the shoes of this woman for a second. Constant physical pain, spiritual social outcast, emotionally, psychologically broken. And you've spent the past 12 years of your life being failed by those who told you that they had a remedy for your problem. You've gathered up what you had and you spent it on a doctor that failed you. And then you were destitute, and you gathered up more, and you spent it on a doctor who failed you, and you were destitute again. And you did that over and over and over again for 12 years. And that's why what we read in verse 27 should be shocking to us. It says this, when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd, and she touched the hem of his garment, as some put it. But it says here, she touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, then I'll be healed. I mean, you have to think, if you're this woman, a nameless woman, but if you are this woman, this is a desperate, and I mean desperate act. This transcends logic. This goes against her experience for the past 12 years. She had been failed again and again and again by people that told her they had a remedy for her problem. But for some reason, she trusts Jesus. She had faith that he might just be the real deal. And we all know, hindsight's 2020, we all know that she's right. And so picking up in verse 28, immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt her body was freed from her suffering. However, simultaneously, something else is happening. Jesus realizes that power had gone out from him. He realizes that somebody touched them. So he turns around in the crowd and he asks, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples rebutted. "You see the people crowding against you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" I mean, like, they're so logical, these disciples are. "Jesus, a lot of people are touching you." But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Now this woman's been caught. You see, her desperate act was not merely illogical, but just like Jairus, she was transcending social convention here. She, a ritually impure woman, has just touched a ritually pure rabbi, and that is not what you do in that day. This unclean woman has just touched a rabbi. This could have been the final nail in her social and spiritual coffin. She may have been healed physically, but the social and spiritual healing she thought she might get from this, no, it's gone if this man figures out what happened to her. Jesus could have retaliated and shamed her beyond redemption. But, for some reason, she trusts this man. She doesn't just believe that he's great. She doesn't just believe that he's mighty. She doesn't just believe that he's able to do something for her. She actually believes in his goodness. She actually believes rightfully in his mercy. She puts her faith in him. She literally, in this moment, what we're about to read, she is going to put her life in the hands of this man named Jesus. Then the woman, knowing what happened to her, came and she fell at his feet, trembling rightfully with fear. And she told him the whole truth. But he said to her, "Daughter," and know that he is not saying this merely for her sake. He is saying this for the sake of the crowds that surrounded her. You have been ostracized spiritually, you have been ostracized socially, but you are now reincorporated as a daughter of Abraham. Your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Go in shalom. Go in the restoration not just of your health, but of your relationship with God and your fellow man. Go in shalom and be freed from not just your physical suffering, but all your suffering. This woman came for a touch, and she left transformed, physically, socially, spiritually, emotionally, and eventually it's going to have a financial impact on her life as well. She came for a touch, and she leaves transformed. And as awesome and as beautiful and as wonderful of an illustration of restoration that this woman really is. Jairus, you forgot about him? Because I did. He's been standing there the whole time, waiting, probably not patiently. Why? Because his daughter is on her deathbed. Mark cuts back to him. While Jesus was still speaking, some of the people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead. Why bother the rabbi anymore? Could you imagine now your Jairus, the defeat and the disgrace that this man must feel in this moment? He went against his own good judgment. He went against all forms of social convention to reach out to this man just to be strung along. I mean, imagine you're Jairus and you're waiting over here patiently, but not actually patiently, but trying to look patient because you kind of put your daughter's life in the hands of this man. And, you know, there's these crowds and he says, "Who touched me?" And you're like the disciples, you're like, "A lot of people are touching you. Can we please just get to my daughter?" And you watch this whole scenario play out, and then you watch the kingdom of God break into this woman's life in the most tangible and most wonderful of ways, just to find out that the sin's curse has now manifested itself in your life in the most severe of ways. Imagine being this man. Overhearing what they said to him, though, Jesus told Jairus, "Don't be afraid. Don't fear. Don't even fear death. Have faith." Just believe. Same Greek word there, believe in faith. Just have faith. Trust that my word is more powerful than the storms of this life. Trust that my word is more powerful than the demonic forces of evil in this world. Trust that my word is more powerful, even more powerful than death itself. Don't be afraid by what you perceive with your five senses, but trust in the fact that my promise transcends any reality that you might think you perceive. Do you see the imagination that faith, real faith in Jesus, invites us into? It invites us to believe the impossible. My favorite line from that scripture reading is the last one. And Abraham reckoned that God must be able to even raise the dead. And so against all odds, Jairus goes with Jesus. Jesus shows up at the house, and it says that he did not let anyone follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And the reason this matters is now we know that everything that's about to happen, eyewitness testimony. Mark's friend is Peter. Peter tells Mark all these stories about Jesus, and then Mark writes them down in what we call the Gospel of Mark. So Peter is now, can you just imagine just for a moment, Peter is on his deathbed basically. He's just telling Mark this story, this awesome encounter with Jesus. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly, and he went in and he said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but he's asleep." And they all laughed at him. And for Jairus, you got to think this is the final straw. He's already felt silly, hoping against all logic. His daughter's dead, and yet he somehow must believe that this man can raise the dead. And Jesus shows up, and now everyone's laughing at him, right? You've returned to your home, and everyone who told you, why would you trust this man that the Pharisees say is a heretic? Why would you trust this man? And now all those people who said, yeah, this would be foolish of you to do, and you showed back up with this man, and your daughter's already dead, and it just feels like you're Jairus. It's just insult to injury. Rubbing salt in an open wound. They're laughing at the two of you. And the ridiculousness of what Jesus has been asking you to do up until this moment has now fully settled in. At this moment of your Jairus, your daughter has never been more dead for you. As they laugh at you for hoping that this man could actually do something about your plight. But where else does he have to turn? So Jairus goes with Jesus, picking up in verse 40. After he, Jesus, puts them all out, he took the child's father and her mother and the disciples who were with them, and they went in where the child was. He took her by the hand. Yet again, you see the imagery of a clean rabbi touching an extraordinarily unclean dead body. But the power is with his word, as Mark always tells us. And he said to her, Talitha kum, which means little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately the girl stands up and she begins to walk around. She was 12 years old. Just as old as the woman had been bleeding. You see the Mark and sandwich and all the connections of the stories? And at this, they were completely astonished, rightfully so, some might say. And he gave her strict orders. This is the great Markan secret. You can't tell anybody about what happened. Otherwise, people would think things they shouldn't be thinking. Don't let anyone know about this. And he told them to give her something to eat. Commentators all note that this is because they don't want, Jesus doesn't want them to think that she's a ghost. And Mark doesn't want anyone to think that she's a ghost. And said like the eating would prove that to be not true, that this girl really has been raised from the dead. This is what is possible. You see the picture of restoration. You see the woman, her whole life, physically, socially, spiritually, emotionally, financially restored. She's now a daughter of Abraham. Restored back to her community, restored to health. You see this little girl raised from the dead. This is what is possible with faith in Jesus. Our imagination should run wild. This woman, depths of despair. This man, depths of despair. And yet Jesus can raise the dead. However, for me and you, I think the rub comes in with this. And that is that me and you in American Christianity, we have minimized what it means to have faith. I think this has manifested itself in two ways in our culture, our Christian culture in America. I've talked about this before, but let me reiterate these points to you. I think one way we've minimized what it means to have faith in Jesus is we've reduced it to nothing more than mental assent or a belief in the existence of God, or maybe a certain set of data points about God. And what it means to have faith is just, I believe X, Y, and Z. I believe in the Trinity, even though I don't understand it. I believe that God, I believe Jesus died, I believe these things about God. And that's what it means to have faith, right? I think it's particularly true on a college campus in a secular state university town. I don't know if any of you had the experience of telling a child or, having, maybe some of you, went to university here and, I don't know if you had people from maybe you come from a smaller rural church and they told you, you're going to go to the big bad state campus. They're, going to take science classes and philosophy classes, and they're going to try to convince you that God's not real. And so we've reduced faith to being nothing more than, well, you just hold on to the fact that you believe in God's existence. I want you to see a distinction between something here. There's a big distinction between believing in God and believing God. There's a difference between believing in God's existence and taking God at his word. Do you see that? These people don't merely believe in Jesus' existence or the existence of a God. They believe that Jesus' word was more powerful, even more powerful than death itself. You see that? Also, think about it this way. The demons in the Gospel of Mark, best theologians. Jesus, Son of the Most High God. They get it. No one else does. And so if faith is merely believing in God's existence, the demons have achieved it. If faith is merely believing in a certain set of data points about God that are correct and right, the demons, oh my, have they achieved it better than anybody else. So we have to think as Christians, faith must be more than mere mental assent. The other way I think we've reduced faith in our American Christianity is that we have minimized faith into belief in myself. I think this happens when we say things like this. During a tough time, and we say to one another, well, we just need to have a little bit more faith. As if faith was up to us in the first place and not up to God. Or maybe, we've reduced faith to checking off a list of places to be, and because we're told at those places to be, aka church, to not do X, Y, and Z, we then don't do X, Y, and Z, and that's what it means to have faith. But I want to be very clear here. There's nothing unique about mustering up more courage in a difficult time that would make Christian faith different from the world. There's nothing unique about showing up to a place where you're told what to do and what not to do, and doing those things and not doing those things. That isn't faith. What makes Christian faith unique is not the one who holds it, but rather the one in whom we place our faith, right? For you English people, the focus of Christian faith is never the subject, but always its object, right? These people, this woman is not mustering up more courage in this moment. Jairus, Jesus, he gets told by people that he trusts, he's told by people that he trusts, who've come from his home that his daughter is dead. They have seen it, they have perceived it with their five senses. They would have not come and told him this unless if they knew for sure that she was dead, right? And he chooses instead to believe Jesus and his word, that he can do something about his dead daughter. That's not mere mental assent, right? And that is certainly not mustering up more courage in the moment. That is believing somehow that Jesus transcends all powers and all authorities, even death itself. And I think when me and you are willing to shift our understanding of faith to transcend beyond mere mental assent and to transcend beyond more mustering up more courage or doing all the right things and showing up to all the right places, I think what would happen to us is we would begin to have imaginations that would transform not just our own lives, but the world around us. What it means to have faith is to function out of a different paradigm than the one the world functions in. What it means to have faith is to function inside of a new rationality. And what was seemingly illogical in the past is now logical to the Christian. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. He had a new rationality. Think about the center point of all of Mark's gospel comes in Mark chapter 8. And Jesus is talking to his disciples. He just told them, I must go and be handed over to the Roman authorities, and I'm going to die, but I'll be raised on the third day, okay? And Peter rebukes him, and he says, get behind me, Satan. And then it says this. Jesus says to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple, they must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life, they will lose it. This is a new rationality. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and the sake of the gospel, they and only they will save it. This is a new paradigm. And so here's just the one application point I want to give you, because I've talked long enough. The one application point I want to leave with you is, how does this apply to how we engage the world? Because all of these stories are very cosmic in theme, even though they're singular stories. They've been very cosmic in theme. Jesus goes in and he takes on the storm, which represents the primordial waters of chaos. Jesus takes on the Roman legion. This is not just a singular story. This is about all of Rome's oppression over God's people. These are cosmic themed stories. And it's about, think about it, Jesus crosses the lake to take on the storm and to take on the demon. This is about going out into the world and the journey of faith. How do we live out our faith in the world? So how does our faith, if we transcend our kind of finite understandings of faith, of just merely mental assent or mustering up more courage or doing all the right things, and we transcend to not mere belief in the existence of God, but taking God at his word, and we allow that to transform our hearts and our souls and our minds and imagine new possibilities, that changes how we engage with the world. And instead of fearing the world, we see possibilities that the world cannot see. So I want you to think about what happens when you fear something, right? When you fear, what is triggered inside of you? Fight or flight, right? I will fight the world or I'll flee from the world. But we, I think, those of faith in Jesus who see possibilities that the world cannot see, who function out of a new rationality, a new paradigm, we have imaginations to see another way. We can see a world that has pitted itself against each other, and we can see a way beyond it. We can see famine in Africa, and as Christians, we can imagine wells. We can see people dying, and we can see resurrections. We can see death and decay and disease seemingly won the day, and we can see restoration. We can see people that we love seemingly going far off from God in a life of flourishing under his rule and his reign, and we can see the prodigal son coming back to Jesus. We should have our faith when we actually understand what it is. We become like Jairus, and we become like this woman, and we can imagine possibilities that the world cannot conceive of. We have a new rationality, a new paradigm out of which we engage this world. The reason our world is so pitted against each other, in my opinion, is because they lack the imagination that Christian faith invites us into. We believe in a God who can raise the dead, and has instilled us with that spirit, as Ephesians says, that actually raised Jesus from the dead. And if that's true, you never let the world put you between a rock and a hard place. There's always more to imagine. What does it look like for me and you to become like Abraham, and you don't understand what the next steps are going to be, but you reason to yourself, God can find a way. Abraham reasoned. He used his logic. God must be able to raise the dead. This morning, if you want to jump into that wild imagination of the Christian life that only comes through faith in the one who has power over this world through the waters of baptism, or you want to realign yourself with that hope, I invite you to meet one of our shepherds at the back, or come forward now as we stand and as we sing.